Our May DDE project is the butterfly tool pouch. So the first thing we'll do is go over what is in your kit. You have a fat eighth of fabric 1, which is the print, which is going to be your front and back. You also have a fat eighth of fabric 2, which is going to be your lining. And we'll go over how you're going to cut those. You also have a small piece of fabric for the inner wing with a piece of fusible backing for that. And then we have a 5 by 6 inch piece of the robin's egg blue embroidery leather. You also have a 3/8 by 18 inch piece of ribbon for the drawstring. So we'll go over how you're going to cut this and what else you're going to need to complete the project. So I'm now going to review what else you're going to need once you've cut your kit. So I've cut 2 6 by 8 inch pieces for the front and 2 6 by 8 inch pieces for my lining. So those have been cut from the fat eighths that were in your kit. Now the instructions call for hooping a piece of water soluble stabilizer. Now this is not the topping, this is water soluble stabilizer. I'm making the 5 by 7 size. So I'm hooping in my 5 by 7 hoop, but I'm going to hoop with no-show mesh cutaway, and I'll explain why as I'm going along. But you will also need some of the water-soluble stabilizer. In addition to that, you're going to need a small piece of water-soluble topping. So this is the difference. This is a topping, and this is water-soluble stabilizer. Now, if your hoop does use magnets, I would recommend using the magnets because you are going to be taking this in and out of your hoop. So that just helps to keep that from popping out of your hoop. So I would use the magnets if your hoop has those. You're also going to need some of the Kimberbell tape. You might want to use some fray check. You're going to need a safety pin and a seam ripper. For embroidery threads, I'm going to need a white, a blue to match the leather. You want yellow with also a bobbin wound to match the yellow, and a black or a dark gray, as well as regular bobbin thread too. The first thing I'm going to do is put my fusible backing on the back of my light fabric here, and this is the only piece in this project that gets the fusible backing. And then I'm going to hoop, in my case I'm going to hoop in my 5 by 7 hoop, my mesh cutaway, but you could also use the water soluble stabilizer, and I'll explain the difference as we go through the project. So go ahead and open the file. Again, I'm doing the 5 by 7, but the steps will be exactly the same for the larger hoop. I've opened the 5 by 7 design on my machine. I've got my cutaway stabilizer in my hoop attached to the machine. I have white thread in the top and bobbin, and I'm simply going to go ahead and sew step number 1, and that's going to do a placement line. I'm now going to put my front fabric face side up over the placement line. Stitch number 2 is going to do a tack down line. You are not going to trim up to that tack down line. You're simply going to go to the next step, which is going to do a placement line for the inner wing. I'm placing the inner wing fabric that had the fusible backing onto the back of it, and we're going to go ahead and stitch that in place. And I'm now going to trim up close to the stitching. I've now changed my thread to yellow, and I'm going to stitch the mesh wing trimming line. The next step is to trim the fabric away inside that trimming line. Now, if you are using the water-soluble stabilizer in your hoop, make sure that you only cut the fabric and not the stabilizer. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and cut everything out. I'm going to cut the fabric, and I'm going to cut all the way through and cut out my stabilizer as well as my fabric. So now you can see I have a hole right through here. Again, if you're using the water-soluble stabilizer, you would have stabilizer underneath here. So the reason I am doing this is I like to have the mesh cutaway to give the pouch a little bit of body. So usually when we make in the hoop bags, we do use the cutaway stabilizer. It gives it a little bit of body. The other reason is when we wash away the wet and gone stabilizer, it kind of gets a little messy, and it usually rinses right out. But because it's going to be inside the bag, I didn't want that to make the inside of the bag kind of sticky. I wasn't quite sure how that was all going to wash away. I just need to really wash away what's going to be inside here when we create the mesh. So I'm going to now take a piece of the wet and gone that I need to stitch through to create the mesh, and I'm just going to tape it down over that area, and I'm going to stitch through there. The next step is going to create the mesh for the wing. I've also placed yellow in my bobbin to match my top. I'm now going to stitch creating the mesh for the wing through the water-soluble stabilizer with yellow top and bottom. I'm going to leave the yellow top and bottom. The next step is going to do the satin outline and detail into the wing. So now that the mesh is all completed, I can go ahead and trim away some of this excess water-soluble so that all I have to do is wash away just what's inside that wing instead of having to wash this whole pouch and having all of the excess water-soluble stabilizer inside the pouch. So I'm going to go ahead and trim some of this, then we're going to put the regular bobbin back in and go ahead and start on the outside wing. The next step after replacing the bobbin thread and putting the powder blue thread in, I'm going to go ahead and sew the placement line for the outer wing. I'm now going to cover this area with just a piece of water-soluble topping, so when I place the leather and trim it, I'm not going to have a chance to cut through my mesh. So we're first placing the water-soluble topping. We'll tape that in place, and then I'm going to tape my leather over top of that, making sure that I cover the placement line. With the leather right side up over top the wash away topping, I'm going to stitch the outer wing tack down line. So after sewing the tack down line, I'm going to trim my leather up to the stitch line. So by having the water soluble topping on top, I can place my blade right on top between the water soluble topping and the leather, and that will help me to avoid cutting into the mesh wing. So we'll go ahead and trim all the way around the leather wing. So I trimmed around the outside first. So now, again, my blade is on top of the water-soluble topping. So as I cut away the inside of the wing to expose the mesh, then I won't be cutting into my mesh wing. So I've trimmed away the excess leather, and you'll want to hang on to these extra pieces because you can always use little scraps of leather in some of the other projects. And then we can just simply rip away any of that excess topping, and then we'll continue with the rest of the design. I've now threaded in a dark blue and it's going to sew the wing detail. After sewing the wing detail, I'm going to thread up in black or dark gray if you want, and we're going to stitch the body. After finishing the body, I'm going to switch to white thread on top, and I'm going to stitch the drawstring openings. I'm now going to remove it from my machine so that I can take my seam ripper and cut open the openings. But I don't want to do that on the machine and damage the bed of my machine. So I'll just take it off and then just cut out those openings and then put it back on. I'm now going to take my lining and I'm going to place it right sides down, and I want the top of the short end to be a ½ inch above. This is my line, my stitch line right here, my tack down line, if you can see it. I want the lining to be about a ½ inch above that, but making sure that it completely covers the tack down line. So I actually cut my piece just a little bit big to begin with anyway, just to make sure. So again, it's a ½ inch above the tack down line up here, and make sure it completely covers the whole front tack down line stitched in step number 6. So it's now going to stitch a seam line. Now the next step is going to do a cut line. So I've changed to a completely different color thread, or you want to at least have a thread that you can see that's not going to blend in with your fabric, but it might be a good idea to use a different color thread than the seam line so that you don't get the two confused. So it's very important that you don't get the cut line that we're stitching now and the seam line confused. So I'm doing my cut line in a different color. I'm now removing it from my hoop, or removing the hoop from the machine, and I'm going to cut right through all the layers on that cut line, extending a ½ inch past where it's stitched. So I'm measuring a ½ inch beyond, and I'm going to stitch from a ½ inch beyond through all my layers directly through the cut line. So we're cutting through all the layers directly on the cut line, extending 1/2 inch. I'm now going to take the lining and I'm going to bring it and I'm going to push it through that opening. I'm going to push it all the way through the opening and pull it through to the back. Now if you have any excess, because I'd cut mine a little bit bigger, if you have any little excess fabric, just go ahead and trim that away as well. So you'll just have your pink all the way through to the back. I'm now going to take my hoop to my pressing board here, and I'm going to pull that lining all the way down in the back, and I can give it that little bit of a press there. And yes, we are aware of the recall on these little irons. I've had these forever and haven't had an issue with them, so it's up to you how you want to handle any recall with that. And then I'm also going to tape down my lining to the back, and then I'll give it another little press from the front. So my lining is pulled nice and smooth down the back, taped in place. Then I'll flip it back over and I can give it a nice press from here. You don't want to see your lining showing on the front. This is another reason why I liked the mesh cutaway, because I can iron on that. I can't iron on the water-soluble stabilizer. So you want to be careful if you're using the water-soluble stabilizer. Just press the crease. Don't get your iron on the water-soluble stabilizer. And also you don't want to use any steam on that as well. And it won't matter if I'm using the mesh cutaway. So I've got this nice, seam nice and pressed crisp. I have reattached my hoop to the machine. I've gone back to white thread and I'm ready to sew the tack down line. This is tacking the lining to the front. The next step is going to sew the drawstring casing lines. I'm now going to take my back fabric piece and I'm going to place it face down, covering the entire front, making sure that I've covered the cut opening in the back or at the top. So make sure that the cut has been covered and that you've covered the entire front, all the stitching, and then we'll tape that in place and stitch that down. So that just stitched the back to the front. Once again, now I'm going to remove the hoop from the machine and I'm going to turn the hoop over and I'm going to place the back lining again so that it completely covers the whole thing, covering that opening as well. So I'm going to tape that in place. So with the back lining Now that's going to be right side down. It's a little hard. This fabric, it doesn't really matter, but if you're using a print fabric, make sure that it is right side down, covering the entire project, taped in place. And now we're going to reattach that to the machine. It's now going to stitch the final outline. Notice it's going to leave gaps where the buttonholes are for the drawstring openings, and also an opening on the side for turning through. You can use scissors or a rotary cutter. You just want to stitch or trim a 1/4 inch all the way around. I find it easier to trim from the wrong side, whichever side you can see the stitching easier, so I can see it a little bit better on the lining side. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim a 1/4 inch all the way around. After trimming a 1/4 inch all the way around, then I trim across my corners, and then I trim about 1 inch up from the corners on each corner. So after doing all the trimming, then we're going to turn it through so that we have the lining showing. We're going to turn the whole thing through to the lining side, and we're going to go in, and I can use a point turner. I'm going to kind of poke out all of my corners, get it all nicely turned through with the lining showing on both sides. I've turned it through, I've poked out my corners. I'm going to give it a nice little press here, which again I can do nicely by using the mesh cutaway, and I'm going to just turn my opening under, press those edges under, then I can just go to my sewing machine and just top stitch that opening closed. So I'm just going to stitch that closed, or if you so desire you could hand sew that, or you could even just put some webbing in there and just fusible web and just fuse it down. I'm just going to do a quick little stitch to close that up. With my opening closed up, I'm now going to just turn the whole pouch right side out. Once again, using my point turner, I'll poke out my corners. I'm now going to explain 2 different ways of inserting the drawstring ribbons. Now I've taken my length that was in your kit, cut it in half, so I have 2 lengths 18 inches long. Now your directions are going to tell you to take both of them and feed them through all the way through the front. So the two trims were pinned together and fed all the way through the buttonhole casing, all the way through the front. Now I'm going to unpin them, and I'm going to pull on one of them so that I now have a longer edge, a long and a short. So I have a short here and a long here. Then I'm going to take the other one and pull it on the other side, so I have a long and a short. So the one ribbon is long on one side, the other ribbon is long on the other side. I'm then going to flip it over to the back, and I'm going to take one of the long sides. I'll put the pin in, and then that is going to get fed through to the other side. There's a little opening that it created in the back. So that is going to get pushed through to the back. So there's not really a casing here, but it's just going to go, you're just going to push that through until it comes out the other side. So once that pin comes out the other side, then we'll pull that through. So now one of the ribbons has gone all the way around. Then we'll take the other long side and do the same thing, but it's going to go in from that side and come out the other side. So make sure, maybe pull on that ribbon to make sure that you didn't get them mixed up. So this is the ribbon with a short side on this side, a long side on this side, and it is now going to go into the opening in the back that the other ribbon just came out of. So it's going in the opposite direction to the other side. And then it's going to come out the other side. And then we can tie those two ribbons together, and then you can pull on them. So now another way of doing this is to simply take, how I usually do it, is I'll take one ribbon and I will run it into the front on this side, all the way around the back and back out the same side. So the ribbon always goes in one side and out the same side. Then I'll take the other ribbon and I'll start on the other side, and I'll go in the front all the way around and back out the other side. So whichever way you want to do it, whether you feed them in together first and use a long side, one ribbon goes in and out the same side, and the other ribbon goes in and out the same side. So we'll just tie these ends together, and then we can pull, and we've got our completed pouch. Now, the last step of the directions is to take and rinse the entire project in cool water to remove all of the stabilizer, and then lay it to dry and then press it out. So by using the mesh cutaway, I leave that in there, and it gives that pouch some nice body, and all I have to do is just take, and I can just actually kind of spritz this, and all I need to do is rinse away that stabilizer that's right underneath the mesh, because that's the only place that I have the water-soluble stabilizer. So by rinsing just that one piece away, I don't have to wash the whole pouch, which also kind of affects my leather. So here's one that's already been rinsed away, and you can see how you can see now through the lining. This is completely rinsed away. But this way I still have the body of the mesh cutaway, and I don't have to rinse the whole thing. It also makes it a lot easier to press, and I don't have that water-soluble stabilizer rinsed away and inside my pouch once I wash it. So you can do it either way. You're just going to use either mesh cutaway to begin or hoop with water-soluble stabilizer, and you've completed your really cute little mesh butterfly pouch. And you could also, of course, just put this butterfly on anything. It wouldn't need to be a pouch. And of course, then you could use your water-soluble stabilizer, and you can just put it on anything, and you'd have a nice cutwork or mesh design. So that is our May DDE Project Butterfly Tool Pouch.